Great to be here, everyone. My name's Miles Shackleton. I'm the brand director at Toolroom. Been working at the label for the last 10 years. My main role really is to tell the story of the Toolroom brand. And that involves overseeing a busy marketing team of marketers, content creators, and really telling the story of the brand, bringing our records to market, pushing our events. So that's one side of what I do. And then additionally to that, I co-founded the Toolroom Academy, which, as Pete said, is our passion. It's how we educate the next generation of house music artists. So that's my two roles at the company.
Thanks, Miles. Yeah, how you doing? So my name's Matt. I'm the head of A&R and label manager. So very much on the musical side of the business, actively kind of looking for new acts, new talent, managing the schedule, scheduling remixes and all that kind of stuff. Been at the label 12 years in February. It's literally just gone like that. It's insane. But yeah, it's a great place to work, and kind of worked my way up from kind of went in as like a licensing assistant and worked all the way through, managed the albums for a couple of years, and then went through, relaunched Toolroom Tracks and managed that for a couple of years as well, and then went on to manage the main label in 2014 was the Reset campaign, wasn't it? So yeah, so kind of 7-8 years of kind of heading up the A&R and kind of managing the music team within the office. So yeah, so that's me.
Excellent stuff. I suppose for those of you that don't know who I am, so my name's Pete Griffiths, and I am kind of one of the lead tutors, A&R, at the Toolroom Academy. Helped create the Toolroom Academy with Miles and a great team that we have now. I'm now in my 18th year at Toolroom, so I've been at Toolroom quite a long time, part of the furniture. So only kind of 2 years after its initial inception, I joined the team and I think the easiest way to describe it is I've pretty much worked in every role there is at the label, starting just from working in graphic design and a label assistant, sending out vinyls that were bought through the website, through to A&R, artist management, and now the Toolroom Academy. So let's start right. Let's start at the beginning. 2003, when the label started. Let's talk about why Toolroom was started, and where the name came from as well.
So I think obviously it's a shame Mark and Stuart aren't here, but the label's very much a family business, founded by two brothers, Mark and Stuart. I guess the reason it started was that Mark was producing music, but not happy with the performance of the labels he was signing to. And there was that feeling that he could just do it better himself. And then equally at the same time, Stuart, he didn't want to continue in his job, which was selling cars. So they decided to go all in and set up the label. The reason it's called Toolroom is literally because Mark built a studio in his dad's tool shed. So that's where the name comes from. And a fun fact is, I actually grew up next door to Mark Knight and Stuart Knight. So little tip if you want to work in the music industry, just see what's happening next door.
I think your bedroom actually overlooked the tool shed. You could see the studio.
That's right, yeah. So he kept me up when I was studying for my finals. I could hear Mark in the studio bashing away. So that's where the label came from. And I think the reason, the kind of musical policy at the start was they wanted to create get out of jail free records, which is essentially that they wanted to be the label that you went to as a DJ when your set was flagging, and you'd reach for a Toolroom record. And they had in their head labels like Subliminal, Strictly Rhythm. They wanted to be that kind of DJ's label that was iconic. They always said if you walked into a record shop and saw a Subliminal record, you'd buy it on sight, just on the base of the brand and the reputation and the consistency. And that was really the aim for Toolroom from day one.
It's like a level of trust, isn't it, really? That you kind of know what you're getting when you see that logo and that branding. So
yeah, exactly.
It's been like that from day one. It was obviously a very different market back then. It was all very much, vinyl in the back of a lorry and driving it up to a record shop and physically handing it over the counter for people to rack and to sell out with handwritten sales notes and stuff. I mean, it was completely different landscape to...
Totally. I think that's how they went into building their reputation.
Yeah.
As a label was, I think the best word to use is hustle. They were hustlers. And as Matt says, it was the days of vinyl, and Stuart used to literally drive up to London to all the record shops, the famous record shops that all the DJs would visit in London, with the vinyl in the back of his van, trying to literally push it and sell it to these shops, trying to persuade them that this was the next big thing. They had to have these records to sell. And fortunately, you know, the music spoke for itself. They would play them the tracks, and they would like it and take them on. And I think as well, it was a real pivotal thing for Toolroom, was bringing something slightly different to the sound in that time, in that year, in 2003, with house music and a slightly tougher tech house sound really coming through in the UK. There was a real involvement, and Toolroom was really at the forefront of that with their sound, which you can listen to a Toolroom Records release from 2003 to what Toolroom puts out now, and you can still hear the thread, even though the production is different, the sounds are very, very different, the soundscape. As a producer, you know, you really notice those things, but essentially there is a feeling and a sound there which is still there, and that's been the sort of core thing from the very, very beginning.
Also, just to add to the kind of inception story, the thing that I have always found quite inspirational about Toolroom's story is that Mark and Stuart, well, first of all, where we're from, the label comes from a town called Maidstone, which is essentially just a suburb. So they were never in the thick of the music industry. They were never super connected. They just had, as Pete said, that hustle and that drive. And they just put some investment in, both of them, and literally built a global brand that started in their parents' tool shed. And I think for you guys, when you're thinking about inspirational stories and where you can go, even if you feel disconnected from the scene, you can, the story of Toolroom shows you can go and build something quite big and quite global, no matter where you are. It comes down to sort of innovation and hustle and drive. And that's what I've always taken from the Nights, is they totally have that.
100%.
Never taken no for an answer, basically.
Yeah, I think, but there's a real, it's a real pairing, Mark and Stuart as brothers. Mark I think he has great vision with his releases. I mean, we often joke about it sometimes when he comes to the label and he's like, I've got a great new track idea. And he'll play it to Matt, and Matt's like, that's a huge sample from the 90s or the 80s or wherever, Mark. And he just sees like, oh my God, problems. Mark is like, don't worry about that, smash through. That's the vision I've got, I want to see that to the end. And Stuart is a much like, as he sort of get things done. Yeah. He will make sure things are done. So there's this real drive, I think that's a key thing. If they have a vision, they will see it through. And Mark often talks about this as a producer as well, and says if you have this idea, and even if you can't actually physically do parts of it or you can't get to it, it's all about how you find a way to make it happen.
Yeah,
totally. I think as well, I mean, those early days, as Miles said, Toolroom was originally an outlet for Mark's music. And Mark really did sort of push a sound there. I think to try and describe as a sort of producer point of view, it was, Mark's a soul boy. His real taste is soul music. But he brought a part of that into what was house as it was moving into tech house, which was a bit of a fresh sound of when much more funky house was dominating the market in the UK at that time. And that was a real key to Toolroom's success, was DJs really taking to the music, to the early releases that were being hustled back in the day in the record shops. It was a sound growing, it was a sound that DJs wanted to play that had this energy, a real peak time energy, but a little bit more of a drive as well. And I think if we talk about some of the early releases as well that were really pivotal, I mean, some of you might remember some of them, some of you might be sitting there and think, who are these people? But one of the early releases was Audio Drive. I think the releases where, if any of you remember the pairing of Mark Knight and Martijn ten Velden, so they would often do releases as MK and MTV. They used to do a lot of remixes back in the day. They were really pivotal in the early days of Toolroom. But also an artist, Dave Spoon. So Dave Spoon, who is now Shadow Child, he rebranded in his career. He was one of the early, I think I'd say kind of, there was a lot of early releases in the first few years of Toolroom, but Dave Spoon was a real example of, and it came through just as a CD in the post. There was no initial friendship there of Mark and Simon, who is Dave Spoon. A CD came through the post, really grabbed the guy's attention. And it was probably one of the first sort of artist signings to the label, someone that came to the label and started actually to come in as an artist and start to create this family thing of artists. But there was a release that he sent, and it was called the
21st Century EP.
21st Century
But
EP.
At Night was actually the B-side, wasn't
No,
it?
that was the EP after, actually. That was the Outside EP.
That's the one.
And the 21st Century EP, it had 21st Century, and the other one was called, I can't remember the other name of the other one, it's awful. But it got supported by Radio 1. Radio 1 played the track. And I remember hearing it, actually, and it was on I think it was on a Thursday night. And that made a huge, huge impact to the label, to people noticing the label, to DJs wanting the record. And as a small business, you're going to notice that quite massively. Suddenly you've got record shops phoning and asking for loads of copies of vinyl to sell it. And it just creates this instant momentum and hype, which is a real thing which you can move forward with. And it's Mark and Stuart with their kind of mentality of pushing forward and drive, really use that to catapult the label.
But I think looking back to that time, I mean, I worked there briefly in the label's first year. So I just sneak in just before you, actually. As
Yeah, it's quite funny that, actually,
yeah,
isn't it?
I actually remember you coming into the office and getting paid in vinyl for your designs. That you did.
I used to basically, I worked in the same town. I was a young DJ just trying to hustle as a resident. And then I was like finding Toolroom releases. And when I found out they were in Maidstone, I was like, where are they? And I used to kind of go and hang around the house and just annoy them.
Yeah.
That's a bit weird.
That was my strategy. as
Yeah,
well.
that was Miles's strategy.
I didn't have to go as far.
Over the fence. That's
Just
like
walked over the fence.
Morning.
But I remember the model back then was very different, and it's interesting to kind of track the changes over the last 20 years. So we started off as a singles business selling vinyl. I remember we were stressing over, we got like £1 of vinyl was our business model, and we'd have to sell 3,000 per release, and you'd just be hustling it. And then you'd have distributors going down, and it was a real kind of Wild West time. And then it changed, obviously, with vinyl going, digital coming in. That's when Toolroom really thrived, actually, because we jumped on that so quickly, and we grew in tandem with Beatport. We got really close to Beatport. And then it became more of a compilation model, didn't it, Matt?
Yeah.
And you worked really hard on that.
Yeah, I kind of stepped in, I think it was 2013, I stepped in and managed the albums, because just as I came in a couple of years before, 2011, as Miles said, it was just the landscape was kind of changing a bit, and the albums was literally just run by one guy, George. So they took me out of licensing and was like, look, the compilation market's really blowing up. I mean, back then we wouldn't think twice of spending sort of 20, 30k on licensing in kind of key releases from all the kind of key acts around the world, and obviously getting the biggest records on them comps at that time. So it was the two of us then, and we literally, for the next sort of 2 to 3 years, it was very much a compilations business. I mean, I remember when our Toolroom Miami album came out, and it actually changed the way that Beatport worked, essentially, because the whole album just went insane, and every single track that was on the album ended up charting in the top 100, and I think at one point we had 73 tracks in the top 100, and people were like losing their fucking minds over it, going, "What the fuck?" Trying to think that we were buying it ourselves and that we cheated somehow. And Beatport were like, "Right, we need to change the way this works." And that's when they brought in the kind of bundles. You know, you got the releases chart, and now you got the singles chart. So I mean, we were just top of the game then. I mean, the compilations were huge. We had people like Jaguar Skills mixing Toolroom Nights album. We had Chris Lake. We had Fede Legrand. We had Stefano Noferini back then as well, when he was kind of peaking and stuff. Yeah, and that was kind of the business model for the next sort of 2, 3, 4 years, really. It's only recently, in recent years, since Spotify has kind of taken over, that the compilations market's kind of dipped a little bit, and it's very much gone back to like a singles-driven business again. But yeah, the great times.
Yeah, it's the thing of, you know, and it's, I think Wes from Defected said something similar actually about Defected coming into their 25th year, you know, and we're 20 years, and sometimes you think, wow, that sounds a bit boring to say we're that old, but we've been through a lot. Toolroom has been through so much changes in the music industry from those days of hustling and selling vinyl through to where we are now, you know, with the change of things in streaming. It's been vast. I think that's one of the keys of staying successful. It sounds cheesy, being true to yourself of what you do, what you believe in, but adapting to the changes in the market has been massive. As Miles said, just going back to that comment of Beatport, and it's still very relevant. I think now, so many producers, artists, labels use Beatport as this benchmark. You want to get that Beatport top 10, you want to be Beatport number 1. And noticing that change into digital was something that the guys saw and really worked very closely with Beatport, even in their development, in their beta phases when the site was being tested. We were very hands-on in giving them feedback with that. And that's been a real key success. And it's not been easy. There's times that I think anyone sat here as a producer, artist, label owner, there'll be times when you think, this isn't working, you want to give up. I mean, just to give you insight on something at Toolroom, I remember when I had started in those early years, and I remember the huge distributor who used to distribute all the vinyl in the UK, Amato, they went bust, they went under, and it was just at the vinyl to digital switchover. And there was probably 20,000, I don't even know the number, of Toolroom's vinyls in this warehouse that they had, which we suddenly couldn't get access to. The creditors took over, the distribution went bankrupt, and we drove up there, and we were advised, don't come. The creditors have possession, and we turned up at this warehouse, and Mark Brown from CR2, I think some of the guys from Defected may have been. There was all these other label people, all sort of just stood there at these gates. And it was quite sad, just looking at this building of like, that's our business, that's our product inside, and we can't get that. And it's something that's always stuck with me, sort of being there quite young, quite early to joining the team and just looking at them all. And you could see how devastated they felt, like, what does this mean to us? How do we recover from this? That's all of our product, we didn't count. And they had to get over that. They had to get past that of losing that product, losing all that money, but embracing the future of getting into digital. And just to give you an insight, I mean, Mark and Stuart would be saying this now if they were there. In those early days, when Stuart gave up his job and they were running the label, Mark was an up-and-coming DJ, producer, just cash in hand. We're not talking massive DJ fees. Anything he earned from his DJ gigs was just put into a pot so they could survive. Between Mark, Stuart, and Owen, who was another guy who set up the label as well with them. And they were living on that. They didn't pay themselves a wage. It was like, what's in that pot? Can we eat this week? That's literally how it was in those early days. It wasn't like, oh great, we've got 5-10 grand to start a business. It was nothing like that. It was literally, I suppose the saying is hand to mouth. Yeah, totally. So let's move on to the current day. We'll go to you, Matt, who's head of A&R of the label. So explain kind of how Toolroom navigates the ever-changing musical trends, which we see so current now. Does Toolroom stay to one style? Do we try to change? Do we stay relevant? How does that work?
I don't think we ever try to change. I think you naturally adapt with trends that are going on without even trying. That just happens in production and the way artists work. But I think we've always tried to. I think the one thing that comes through is quality. I think regardless of what the style of the record is, I think it will be how it sounds, how it delivers in the club. I think we've always, apart from one time, which I can touch on in a minute, we've always sort of stayed in our lane, for want of a better phrase. But we're quite lucky that our lane has always been quite wide and quite broad. I mean, we can release anything from Dusky to Alan Fitzpatrick, and we have. We've always had that. A bit of a USP of Toolroom, really, that our fan base have always allowed us a little bit of leeway, really. We've never really been that pigeonholed, so we've always had that little bit of freedom, which I think comes from Mark being quite versatile with his sets as well, from the top of the tree. Yes, we've always kind of stayed in our lane. I think the one time, and it's worth saying, through the 20 years, we haven't always got everything right. There's been mistakes along the way. I remember back in 2014, just before we did the reset, the whole EDM thing was kind of blowing up. And Mark was like, we need to get on this EDM thing. It's going to be massive. It's going to be the next big thing. Everyone in the office was a bit like, not too sure that's the right thing to do. We did it. He come to me, he was like, right, we need Hardwell, we need Nicky Romero, we need all these artists. And I was like, right, okay, did it, because that was my job. But then I was kind of semi-A&R in sort of EDM tracks. Mark wasn't playing any Toolroom records in his set.
I think everyone realised, the whole team.
Yeah, Mikey was writing press releases.
The whole team realised that it wasn't us. It wasn't true to us.
And I mean, that was, after a few months, we had a kind of a bit of a crisis meeting and all sat in the boardroom and was like, right, what are we doing? Like, this just isn't Toolroom. And that prompted the whole reset campaign where we just literally, we got a big marketing company and stripped everything back, changed everything. Brand new roster, changed the logo, everything. Just
Which
the whole...
Miles kind of oversaw this whole rebrand campaign. I mean, we shouldn't underplay that. That was huge, the reset campaign.
Yeah, it was. Looking back, I mean, it was quite a big risk. I almost think if I'd have done it, I did it when I was 30. I don't think I'd do it now I'm 40. Maybe it's a sort of arrogance of youth. But yeah, it was an interesting time, as the guys were saying, and I think it's almost like the music scene polarized so much. You had EDM, and then you had that reaction against it in deep house, and we kind of fell in the gap, and we had to choose. And then equally, I think the social media landscape was changing. It was more about building tribes online, was how you would build an audience and ultimately bring records to market. And again, if you want to do that, you kind of need to have quite a distinct offering. Yeah. You can't build a tribe. There's not like that many people that love Hardwell and Dusky. Yeah. So you have to kind of choose. So we did choose what we loved as opposed to necessarily what was the quickest win commercially. And we did a load of really deep qualitative research of our fan base. I did loads of focus groups with our fans. And I really learned from that this utter trust in us. So it really filled us with confidence that no matter what we did, I remember doing a focus group and asking the same question for 2 days, like, how do you just unpack how much they trusted us? And I was getting quite bored by the end of the same answer, so I was pushing it. And I said to one guy, okay, so what would you do if we released jazz then? And he was like, yeah, I'll probably buy it. And I was thinking, okay, we can do what we want.
Coming soon.
So we had a great audience that would come with us, and we, as Matt said, did a big rebrand campaign. We called it Reset, which is quite bold to say we're starting again for a company that was 10 years old at the time. Yeah. And that's where the big T logo came in, and we did a lot of work around what that meant and what we wanted people to feel when they saw that logo. And I think we built phase 2 of the business, especially the three of us, I think, in terms of how we built that and scaled the business up from there. So
yeah, that's around the time that I stepped into the A&R role, and we signed Vice. Obviously, Pete was managing Vice from day one. The whole kind of Vice project came from Pete working with Rich, who was just desperate to get out of this EDM thing. And we also signed Adrian Howard, this kind of techno guy from Argentina that Mark played with one weekend and was like, fucking hell, this guy is amazing, we need to get on this guy. And it just played into the whole concept, the whole house, tech house and techno thing. We almost had like a 3-pillar kind of musical policy, and Vice represented the house column, Mark was the tech house in the middle, your peak time, loads of energy, and Adrian kind of brought the darker kind of full-on vibes at the end with the techno, so you could literally visualise it.
There was a link though. The mad thing was, between the 3 sounds of those 3 artists, they totally linked in a sound.
Yeah, you could play them.
I know
one
it sounds
after the
cheesy, but which was the Toolroom sound.
Yeah. Literally you could start with a Vice set, go into Mark and finish with Adrian, and it was a great night of musical programming, it would just progressively get harder and tougher and bigger, and yeah, it's fantastic, and that sort of propelled the label, as you say, into phase 2, I think. So
and I think a big part of that reset, we talk about Vice and Adrian Hour and Mark Knight, and obviously Miles, you talk very passionately about spending so much time with, if we call them the fans of the label. That's when I noticed the real start of what we call the Toolroom family. And we say that, and sometimes it sounds cheesy, but I think there really is. There's a thing. It exists, this Toolroom family, from the actual people who run the label. They really are a family. It extends from Mark and Stuart, and even Mark's dad, by the way, Ken, is a huge part of the label, who's in his 80s now, and he's the most knowledgeable person in his 80s.
What he doesn't know about tech house.
With tech house, it's unbelievable. Sitting down having conversations with him about really current tech house artists is crazy. But it goes right from there through to the artists that are the label. But part of the Toolroom family is actually, I don't like to use the word fans, because it's not fans. I feel like it is one.
It's kind of, and I don't want to go to sort of too marketing theory, but the reasoning behind us doing that as well was there's a whole world of marketing that's to do with the power of the superfan, and you can actually apply this to your own careers as burgeoning artists. There was an article several years ago by a guy called Kevin Kelly that talked about the power of having 1,000 fans, which seems quite small in the context of big businesses, just to have 1,000 fans in the age of like mass scale communication. But the basic theory is if you look after your, say 100 fans extremely well, they then tell all their friends and family, and it gets exponentially bigger. And that's something, as a theory, I was really keen on applying to Toolroom. And so we do a lot of work making sure our closest fans are looked after. They have like a separate email list. We do separate private events. We even trust them with SoundCloud links of releases before they're promoted even to big DJs. There's this whole kind of intimate connection. And I think there's that interesting juxtaposition of Toolroom being this big global brand and this sort of work we're doing on a superfan level. There's room for sort of really fertile and interesting marketing content. And I always think with upcoming artists, a good way to think about it is it seems quite scary to build an audience from scratch, but all you actually need to start with is like 20 people that really, really like you. And from that, you can build a lot. So it feels a lot more manageable to think about it like that. So it's just, there's a lot of interesting work around, superfan engagement. And that's what the Toolroom family is. It's about breaking down that barrier between us as a big brand and our fans. And I think it works for the fans because they get something intimate and different and unique. And it works for us because they're our biggest advocates and our biggest marketers, really.
Totally, and I think even it coming from the grassroots of the team, but yourself as well, Matt. I mean, yourself and Mark, and obviously other members of the music team, hold together the Toolroom family within artists, and the relationships that you hold with artists, which is it's a real deep thing that you have.
It really is, but it's like you say, the family values has kind of been there from day one. When you look at the first crew of Dave Spoon, Funk Agenda, all those guys, Adam Shaw, Chris Lake and all those guys came in. There's always been this kind of, almost like a family group mentality from day one, that tribe kind of vibe like you were talking about, Miles, as well. And that's always been, and again, going through to the Reset campaign, Vice, Adrian, Mark, there's always been this kind of backbone of kind of that family kind of vibe all through the business from day one.
Because you're very close to the artists as well, aren't you, that you work with? So you build up quite long-standing relationships with them, and it's not just signing records. You go and see them and spend time with them in studios and...
Yeah, it's all to do with relationships, really. I need to be... When our artists are in the studio and they've just written the best record of their life, I need to be the first thought in their head, oh, fuck, I'll send that to Matt. I don't want them thinking about other labels or anything else. So I'll go above and beyond. As Pete says, I'll go and, go and have some lunch or dinner, or we go and sit in the studio, or get them into Toolroom HQ. Let's do a mix. Let's go out and have some lunch. Let's go and have some food. Or it's all about relationships and trust, I think. And I think if you work a record and you work your ass off, pardon the expression, and do a great job, then they're going to trust you with their next record. So when they finish that, they're like, I'll give that to Matt because Toolroom did a really good job with that before, and I trust them, and I know they're going to get the best out of it. So that's important. It's a really important part of the job.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk about the Toolroom Academy now. Let's talk about that. Why did the Toolroom Academy start?
Well, number of reasons. I think first of all, we noticed the number of demos we were getting, 500 a week sometimes. So we knew there was this massive segment of new artists, and I think the way technology changed to make it, I guess, the sort of democratization of the music making process meant that there were just more people making music. Secondly, I always noticed actually whenever we put out some content from you guys on socials that would be like top 5 tips to get signed, which felt like, okay content, but not stuff we'd spend weeks and weeks preparing. It would get a disproportionate amount of engagement. So we knew there was this big audience. We knew there was this appetite to learn about how to break through. And then, as well as that, I personally studied a course with Google, a digital marketing course, which was a really interesting experience. And it made me realize that brands can get into education and offer something a bit different. Real-world learning, more innovative curriculums, ultimately feedback from actual real professionals. So it was a case of knowing there was an idea there. We launched initially with just pre-recorded production tutorials, which they're everywhere now. Now I know, but at the time we were quite early in doing that. But it was the launch of that bit of the business where I think we saw the real potential, because we launched that bit of the business at ADE in 2015. We did like a live studio session with Harry Romero, amazing producer from New York. And I was watching the crowd watching him, and I'd never seen such an attention span in like the iPhone era of people just locked in on something. And I just knew then we had something really special.
And that's the passion from the inception of the label as well, as Mark and producers, that absolutely that's their life, you know. Producing music is what they really are passionate about from the very beginning. And I think what we realised then as well, when we started this, and we were like, this is actually an amazing way to get close and discover and help new talent as well for the label. Because as Miles said, how does anyone listen to 500 plus demos a week? It's very difficult. And at that time, the team's not huge. You know, you're trying to actually run the label and find and discover tracks and work with the artists we have. It was very difficult. We tried many systems to get through demos. I remember we used to have this one particular laptop that would get passed around the office. Everyone had to do like a shift, a few hours of going through demos within their workday, or take it home and do it in the evening. And it was like, right, you've got to get through at least 50, 60 before you get back to what you're doing. And everyone did, and because everyone shared the same passion, that want, which is embedded in most people that want to DJ, that want to have a career in the industry, is like constantly, you want to find something, especially from a DJ point of view. You're always trying to find that next big record. It's the same with a record label. You're thinking, I'm going to find it. The next one's going to be the one. I'm going to find it.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we've just got Bailey looking at all the demos himself. So, but yeah, I think we've moved the Academy on since then, and we've, as Pete said, we've met some amazing artists. You know, I'm looking at Alex here, who's done a number of our courses. He's absolutely smashing it. Some of the proudest moments I've had in my career is when actually our students make friends with other students and then go on and do something together, whether it's a collaboration like Alex has done with 4 other of our students, or they go and set up a label together, or a club night. It's just a really special thing. We've built this community. And, you know, I think it goes back to what we were saying about the brand values of Toolroom ultimately, and that we have a lot of trust from our audience. We're really consistent musically, and we're quite approachable, hence the Toolroom family. And I think all those values kind of coalesce into the Toolroom Academy really well. 100%,
100%. We are, keep using this word passionate, but we really are passionate of helping the next generation, or even I say the next generation, I don't mean just young artists, but I mean the next tier of artists breaking through. I mean, if someone had said to me 10 years ago when I was working in the A&R role, you'll be teaching effectively, I didn't actually see that coming. But right now, I'm full-time academy, tutoring, doing A&R feedback, and I absolutely adore it. It's amazing, it's very rewarding, and it's just the best thing to see people actually take on board things that we've learned, mistakes as well over the past 20 years, and pass that on. And I think that's been a USP to us compared to other production schools, if you want to use that word, is we're actually someone who's successful in the industry right now, passing that straight on and being able to help people move on. And it's not just about finding artists to sign to Toolroom. I'll add that as well. We have these artists, we say like Alex again, and they're great, and they come through, and I'll be going to Matt and saying, Matt, you've got to check these new artists out that are coming through the academy. And that has worked. It's been an amazing thing through. But also as well, we've had artists that have gone on to completely different labels, brands, whatever you want to call it, that we've said, this is the direction you need to be going, and help them nurture and help them get there. So let's move on to some behind the scene questions as well. I think for people who might be interested in starting their own labels, who are just interested in what goes on at labels as well. So the team that we have as a label, let's talk about the various roles that lie within Toolroom.
Yeah, so from my side with the music team, I mean, Mark is very hands-on in terms of A&R, very much hands-on in the studio. Myself, Mark, and our music director George, we'll try to have a weekly A&R meeting every Tuesday. We call it the A&R-a-thon. We'll literally get in there at 9:30 on a Tuesday morning, and we'll just be in there until 4 or 5 in the afternoon, by which time none of us can see because we've just had such a manic day. So that's our kind of weekly kind of remit. We all collect demos during the week. Obviously, we have a demo pool through Label Radar, but we get a lot of, because of our relationships over the years, we obviously get a lot of demos sent to us personally as well. So we all kind of build our own little kind of folders throughout the week, present them to each other in the A&R meeting on the Tuesday, and kind of obviously go through, decide what we're going to sign and what we don't.
And beyond you guys as that front line, there's a music team behind you as well,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, we do, we've got like our own kind of label services business called Amplified as well, so we actually manage quite a few third-party labels. Danny Howard's Nothing Else Matters, we look after Etiquette for Hannah Wants, Saved we look after as well, Kaluki, Abode. I think there's about 12 labels, I think, under the roster at all, which is managed by a girl called Lou. She's a fantastic label manager. We've got Jack, who's like label assistant, who kind of helps me out with kind of label credits and kind of digital uploads, metadata, all that sort of stuff. And then you've got Danny as well, who looks after Toolroom Radio. He also manages Toolroom Tracks, which is our kind of more techier, kind of slightly more underground sub-label as well. So, yeah, it's a hubbub of activity in there, but it's great. It's a great kind of environment in the office, as you know.
And outside of the music team, Miles, as well, there's quite a variance of roles within the label.
Yeah, I'm kind of annoyed Stu's not here because I was going to use this as a pitch to increase the size of our marketing team. But we've got our marketing team who, there's a few people in that team there's a couple of content creators, Rihanna and Yasmin, who are great at making artwork, videos. There's so much work in today's landscape. There's so many platforms. And we've got so much product that we constantly have to be making amazing content, visual content, to sell our music. So we've got 2 people doing that, and then we've got 3 marketers who make a weekly social media schedule across our platforms, and then also write marketing campaigns for all of our many music releases we do, which really the job is to both engage our fans through that content, but also sort of pitch into stores, help our sort of head of digital pitch our music to Spotify and Beatport to get consideration for placement. So we're writing campaigns almost for business to business as well as to consumer. And then we have the Academy team as well, Carly, Bailey, yourself, Pete, and myself, and we're constantly thinking of ways to innovate music education and also just serve our customers and making sure they have the best experience possible.
Yeah, it is cool. What's the actual size of the team now?
It's about 20, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, 20 people.
20, yeah.
Yeah, plus lots of outsourced companies as well.
Yeah.
Definitely. So, and we say we've reached the 20-year milestone now at Toolroom, and we're celebrating with the Where Music Matters campaign as well. Can you just explain what that means as a campaign and how we've taken that stance to celebrate being 20?
Sure. So, well, first of all, when you're planning an anniversary campaign, you've got to be cognizant that sometimes it's more interesting to you than it is the audience. That's something I always check myself on. You can be quite self-congratulatory in anniversary campaigns. Also, in ultimately a youth audience, sometimes talking about how old you are isn't always the best thing either. So we didn't want to do a big, we're 20 years old. We wanted to use the anniversary as an excuse to say a message that we feel delivers what we're about for the next chunk of our history. So Where Music Matters, what we're saying with this campaign, I think, is that imagine the word music is underlined in that phrase. Sometimes I feel that, and I know Mark's really passionate about this, we've maybe lost sight of music being the number one driver and number one most important thing in this scene. You know, we've been putting out a few statements like rhythm, not algorithm, you know, moments, not metrics. We think that ultimately, when all's said and done and Toolroom finishes, the music is going to always be there. It's going to stay there forever. But a post about someone coming out of a plane on their way to a gig, no one's going to remember that. Let's remember the music and let's champion the music and producers, the people that are the lifeblood of the scene. And that's what the campaign is about, is just our way of addressing the balance on that. So that's the kind of story, and we're bringing that through with a number of shows. We're planning a documentary we're working on about that very thing. And really it's just about championing the music more than anything.
Yeah, amazing. And on that, can we give an insight into any future plans for the brand and the label as well?
Well, I think, Matt, you can speak more to the musical strategy, I think, in terms of how we're going back to our roots in a way.
Yeah, very much so, yeah. So we kind of, obviously through COVID, with no clubs open, we had to kind of really steer the ships. We obviously all sat at home, and I was signing big kind of piano records, and everything was very sort of radio focused, so that was the plan. But obviously when we came back from that and clubs started to open, there was very much the point that no one was really playing Toolroom records because we hadn't released any club records because there was no clubs open, so it was a simple thing. So I had to re-steer the ship back, and that Mark was very, very vocal about that. Toolroom has always been a club brand, and here we are in clubs and no one's playing a Toolroom record, like what's going on? So we had to really re-steer the ship and get back to our roots and start signing more kind of clubbier records, which is why, if you follow us as a label, you would have noticed that the output has genuinely got quite tougher, a lot more instrumental, more energy in the records because they're kind of aimed at the dance floor rather than at the radio. So the focus for that moving forward, certainly for this year, is very much in that lane. With it being the birthday as well, I tried to sort of push the boundaries a little bit in terms of the artists that I've been getting on the label. Like we've had Low Stepper on the label this year, we've had Shiba San on the label, got a Noisy remix dropping in a couple of weeks, another Casey Lights record. So it's reaching outside of the roster, trying to develop things, keeping it cool, keeping it clubby, and just making sure that we're sticking true to our kind of sort of label mantra of being that kind of record that you're working towards in your set. That's always going to be the kind of go-to, really. And
I know there's a lot of focus and synergy between us and the music team with the Academy as well, of trying to bring through new artists. And we've really focused the last sort of 18 months on these Leaders of the New School releases as well, which really focus on new talent, where we try to bring through a lot of the people that have come, not just from the Academy, but also artists that you guys in the music team as well are following with your ear to the ground to bring through. So there's a big focus on new talent as well.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, SL is a great example of that. Obviously, just recently had a #1 with Sweat with us. Picked her up for management kind of 18 months ago, and Lennon went to #3, and we thought we'd finally got there, and then Sweat went to #1 last week. She's just signed a big deal with 3Beat, like a big singles deal. She signed a big Ultra publishing deal as well. And that came to us through our We Are Listening campaign, which is kind of encouraging women in dance music. That's another kind of arm to the business. So she's been one of our real recent success stories. And the sky's the limit. She's awesome. So she'll be a big focus for us moving forward as well.
Definitely. So finally, before we maybe take any questions from the floor, let's give a highlight. Have you got any personal highlights from the last 20 years of the label?
Can I go first?
Yeah, do you want to go? Yeah.
So for me, as I said earlier, when we did the rebrand, it was like a massive risk. And I remember having one of those moments going, am I just plunging this label into disaster? We launched it and it went really well, but we had an event that really launched it at a club. Was it Egg?
Fire, wasn't it? Yeah.
Fire in Vauxhall in London.
And I remember hanging up the new light boxes with the logos and waiting for the club to open. And I just sort of looked outside and I saw this massive queue, and I saw a guy at the front with the new logo, the new merch, and he had the new T-shirt on. And I was like, oh, phew, this is going to work. Yeah. I just remember that was the best moment.
Thank the Lord.
It's like a massive sense of pride and relief all in one moment.
I suppose for me, personal highlights obviously going to be more musical for me. I suppose from a personal point of view, I'd probably say the Feel My Needs record, 2018, the Vice record that really blew up. And because we did it all ourselves, it was just a beast, wasn't it? Obviously we knew, I remember getting the demo and listening to this kind of 8-bar loop of Richard just kind of put this piano and this kind of sample together and stuff, and we was like, wow, fuck, that's massive, that's going to be brilliant. But I don't think any of us could have actually predicted quite the kind of firestorm that it was. It just kind of gained momentum, and the radio was crazy. It hit that sweet spot of a Toolroom record where it sounds great on the radio and you can play it in a set, It's straddled that kind of middle ground. It went on, it's certified gold in the UK. It's sat on over 250 million streams across all the streaming sites. It's actually, it's gone gold now actually, as well. Amazing. And the fact that the phone was ringing off the hook from, Universal, Sony, Ministry, all trying to throw money at us to license it. It was like, no, we want to keep it in-house, do it ourselves. And we did, and we own it for perpetuity, for lifetime of copyright, and that's, it's like a real evergreen record, but it's such a team work, wasn't it? Everyone kind of had a little bit of a slice of that record.
I think that's what was amazing with that one.
Everyone just kind of clubbed together, and that's the one that I look at on my wall with a wry smile in the morning.
Definitely. I think for myself, there's a lot of stories I can't tell because I was lucky enough to go on tour with Mark quite a bit in the early years and had a lot of fun with
We'll
it.
save them for later.
Yeah. I think probably my proudest moment is when we very first launched a live production course, the production certificate. It's kind of our flagship course at the Academy, and I'm not going to lie, it was probably nearly the death of me. It's why my voice is like this, to be fair. We spent a year whilst doing our current jobs. I was still working in the artist management, and me and Ben Remember spent a whole year practicing a course, looking at each other on Zoom. I wish I bought shares in Zoom. We used Zoom before the pandemic, and hardly anyone was using it. We had our own personal account manager we could speak to.
This will never catch on.
Yeah, and we were like, this is strange. We were talking to each other and pretending that we had an audience and going, this is really weird, this is so strange. We spent about a year designing that course, practicing it. We had people from the label. When we first went live and had a class of 20, and at the end of that, it was like, that was really cool. That was really cool, and the engagement, everyone seemed to enjoy it, and that feeling when you know you're kind of onto something, I think was probably my proudest moment.
Nice. Yeah.
So, has anyone got any questions they'd like to ask? Any of us? It could be anything on the history of the label, setting up a label, anything at all. Don't be shy. Yeah, go for it.
As a tech house label, what do you think about the EDMization, as I would call it, of the tech house music currently?
That's a very good question. Be honest, Matt. Be honest.
Sorry, can you say that again?
As a tech house label, how do you see where there's a part of the tech house scene being kind of EDMized?
Yeah, it's kind of certainly in the US. I think with your DJs like Fisher and those kind of guys, it's kind of become a bit entry level, hasn't it? I think that's just been a natural progression of where the music's gone, and it's just proof of its popularity. And I always say the musical pendulum swings all the time, and it will just go round in circles, and the minimal thing will be cool for a bit, and then it will go back underground again, and the minimal thing will be cool again. It's just trends, isn't it? It just comes and goes. But I think again, like we said earlier, if you just stick true to your sound, stay in your lane, and as I say, everything goes round in a circle and comes back and will be cool again. But yeah, it's cool. Let them have their
definitely.
moment.
I think the positive that is that it brings so many people to entry of not just tech house, the house music scene as well. But I think anything that becomes popular becomes rinsed, I suppose is the word I use. It gets really pushed to its absolute infinite, bigger and bigger and bigger until it all sort of implodes. But it doesn't mean that everything underneath that disappears or gets affected. It's just this sort of top level of which the celebrity lifestyle the popular lifestyle come into that. But you'll always get a trickle down. That's what I think is the positive thing about that.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, agreed. As a marketer, I see opportunity for those reasons you just said. I think also the scene just needs to be mindful of staying diverse and staying true to the original values and not going to, I don't know how to say it, but there's a kind of, I think there's an argument we just need to keep our diversity and keep fresh with the music. And but yeah, it's a good opportunity for brands like Toolroom because it's massive growth in North America. And I think the people that, you see the footage at Coachella of Fisher playing to so many people, maybe they're having their first house music experience, maybe then they filter down to Toolroom in a couple of years' time, and that's great for us, and that's how we keep our business going. So,
good question, thank you.
Great question.
No worries.
Any others before we wrap up this one? Yeah.
Hi. What do you think, as pioneers of Toolroom, what differentiates house music from tech house, and where does Toolroom fit into this kind of? Because in my experience, the words get thrown around a lot, and everybody has a different opinion on what is tech house and what is house, and I don't know. What's your take on this?
That's a really good question. There isn't like the one answer that's written down as a definition in the dictionary, and I think it is a bit of an individual thing of what people see, but there is a definite difference between those sounds.
Yeah, I think the lines are a lot more blurred these days. I don't think it's quite so black and white, is it? It's kind of the lines are blurred a little bit more. Obviously your house is going to be a bit more vocal, maybe a bit slower in BPM. Your tech house is going to be a bit more pacey and a bit tougher, maybe more instrumental. But again, it's as you say, a lot of it's a personal take, isn't it?
I think it's the sounds that are used for us. You know, it actually goes back to what I said about the inception of Toolroom, when what was very prevalent there was a sound that had come originally from the US. You know, US soulful house, which originally came from the Bertha house, which came from disco. And Toolroom started something that it was true to that, but it just had a slightly tougher, cleaner, edgier feel to it, slightly more edgy. You know, and if you look at that as a scale, it just keeps going towards techno, where techno is stripping away more of the kind of groove that you get from soul and disco and those warm sounds, and making it into a more hypnotic, euphoric state. Is sitting in the middle for me.
Yeah, and I think that's where Toolroom sits as a label. We've always sat in that. It's never been super housey, it's never been super tough. We've always straddled that middle lane of kind of accessibility, I suppose, accessible club records.
Because it's a strange place now. You can say tech house, and when I'm within the Toolroom Academy, I'll say, right, tech house probably has 10 sub-genres within it. If you really want to get to the weeds of it, you know, which certain other brands have actually created their own sound. If we look at Solid Grooves, and you look at these different labels and hot creations, we're all within tech house, but we all have our own actual space within that, and a real difference in the sound, a difference to the artist, a difference to the crew, which is something I'll talk about in another panel later, because I'll start going
Don't go anywhere.
I'll start going deep on this. So yeah, I hope that answers your question anyway.
Yeah, pretty much.
Thank you. We probably need to wrap this up, because 5 minutes time we're going to be going straight into a production masterclass with an amazing artist and one of our lead tutors, Dee Ramirez. So thanks very much for joining us, guys. Thank you for your insight, guys,
Nice one,
as well.
Peter. Cheers, guys.
Thank you very much.